Very good.
Welcome to this week's mitzvah of the week for Parsha Vayigash. Let me share my screen. The mitzvah of the week, as always in this piece of the Torah, hinges upon a small pasuk. And what I think is especially interesting about it is that there's sort of a more explicit pasuk that we'll see in Devarim. I'm just remembering how to share, where it says the contrary. And so it seems to me it would have been easy to interpret this in another way. But for whatever reason, this is the way that it's been interpreted. And this is truly the pasuk on which the conversation falls, unlike some of the other ones that we've looked at where we're just a model. Here, our pasuk is quoted within the halachic discourse. Okay. So this week's Parsha of Vayigash is when we begin to wrap up the saga, the soap opera that was the story of Yosef and his brothers, where Yosef is sending his brothers back to Canaan to tell Yaakov that he is alive. And when he sends his brothers off, right, it says, "Vayishlach et achav vayelechu," he sends them on their way. Vayomer alehem, and he says to them, "Al tirguzu baderech," which here is translated as "do not be quarrelsome on the way." Al tirguzu baderech is going to become this code. Oh my heavens. Okay, hold on one second. It's going to make me sign back in. Maybe. I don't know, right? Oh, no, there we go. Oof. Okay. Al tirguzu baderech. Sorry, one second. It's forcing me to sign myself back in, which is always a little challenging. Um, Right, could mean don't fight. And if anyone has ever been like on a road trip with small children, Altir Gazuba Derech for siblings might make perfect sense. It's like don't argue with each other, right? Don't quarrel on the way. But we'll see in a short moment that Rashi quotes the Gemara in Tanit, I believe, explaining that what it means is perhaps you should not learn Torah on the way. So, just one moment. We're going to copy my password. We're going to continue. We're going to enter the password. Like a weird, irritating quirk. Oh, come on. Still not working. Sorry. And I have trouble, what is it? Chewing gum and walking at the same time. Um, it should be open. Let's try the passkey. Do you feel like this is like a test of my IT skills every time I try to do this? Let's see.
I think these things only happen to me, so it's reassuring to know that I'm not alone where
Okay.
these things, just follow you up.
Let's see. Um, yeah, I don't. Okay, sign in with a passkey. It looks like it's going to do it. Let's see. Looking good, looking promising. Woohoo! I think we're back. Okay. Thank you for your patience during that brief break. Can you guys see the screen still? Okay, it looks like Judy is shaking her head. Yes. Okay, let's make it bigger. Should Tamar and Jerry join us, they will appreciate that. Okay, so al tirkuzu b'derech. What does Rashi say? Rashi says al titasku b'davar halacha. So again, I think it's interesting. We're going to see this pasuk from Devarim. It's so anachronistic, and I know that that's how Rashi thinks. But like, why would you think that someone who lived thousands of years before the development of halacha was telling his brothers not to learn halacha on the trip when there are so many other sort of reasonable explanations for what tirguzu means? But it seems important to the rabbis to say that it should be about learning halacha. And why shouldn't you learn halacha on the road? Shelo tirgaz alechem al haderech, which is translated as not becoming unsteady or losing your way on the derech. Now, I do think it makes sense as an explanation, meaning if you've ever gotten caught up in a really good podcast or a really good conversation with your co-rider, you sometimes miss an exit or forget to turn or go, the way you always go to one place when you're trying to go somewhere else. So this idea that immersing yourself in a halachic discussion might cause you to lose your way or become unsteady, I don't think is a wild idea. I just think it's kind of wild to pull it out of Al Tirgazu Baderech. Okay. That's one explanation. Rashi cites all three explanations from Ta'anit. Davar acher al tifsi'u psi'a gasa v'hichlasu b'chama le'ir. Don't take very long steps and enter the town where you will stay overnight while the sun is shining. An interesting one. Ulefi pshuto shel mikra, and the sort of plain meaning seems to be explained. Lefisha hayu nichlamim haya doeg, shema yarivu baderech al davar mechirato, להתווכח עם זה ולומר על ידך נמכר, אתה סיפרת לשון הרע עליו וגמרת לנו לשנותו. So this is, of course, as Rashi says, the most reasonable explanation is don't fight. Right? Yosef is worried that they're just going to argue, oh, you were the one who had this idea to sell him, or you were the one, or if only you hadn't said this Lashon Hara, he wouldn't have hated us. Right? They're going to sort of rehash the whole long saga, and they're going to argue on the way back. However, al tirguzu b'derech, don't titasku b'davar halacha is the one that sticks. Right? You would think Rashi's last explanation would be the one. And I brought this small piece of the Gemara that Rashi does not quote, which is sort of an expansion of this idea on some level. Rabbi Elazar says, Amar lahem Yosef la'achav, Yosef says, Al titasku b'davar halacha, shema tirgezu alechem aderech, right? That's exactly what Rashi quoted. Ini, is that really so? Right? The rabbis of the Gemara actually have a different problem than I do. V'ha'amar Rabbi Eli bar Brechia, shnei talmidei chachamim shemehalchim baderech, ve'ein beinehem divrei Torah, ru'uyin lisaref. He says that, but that's not true. When Torah scholars are walking along the road and there are no Torah matters discussed between them, they are worthy of being burned. Right? It seems like what he's saying is both that like this is not the common culture. People are encouraged to learn Torah on the way. And I would assume he's thinking this isn't what happens. There are many stories in the Gemara where rabbis are learning Torah as they walk along a path. And so why would we assume something that is like counter the culture that has come up? Right? Forget about being anachronistic. It's like it doesn't mesh. It doesn't match up with what the rabbis are doing. And it would be very awkward to feel like the rabbis were all doing something wrong. The Gemara gives us an interesting diuk, which is where we will sort of go with this whole halachic discussion, right? So I'm just skipping this pasuk and the reason of why they might be burned, but the Gemara answers la kashya. This is actually not a problem. This is like a very famous resolution to a Gemara, right? We have two opposing perspectives. One is this perspective that one shouldn't learn Torah. The other is the perspective that people should be burnt if they don't learn Torah. Lemigras, the opinion of Rabbi Eli bar Brechia is referring to studying by rote, like reviewing something you've already learned, maybe listening to a podcast, right? Not sort of delving deep, but just sort of on the surface, studying by rote. The other opinion, that of Rabbi Elazar, la'ayone. And this idea of iyun, of examining, of really going into detail is going to be the thing that we get stuck on. And again, if you sort of refer back to the beginning of Rashi, it makes sense because if you're just learning, if you're just reviewing something, or you're like quizzing your kid in the car, or you're listening to a podcast, it's not likely that you would get lost. But if you were really trying to like break your teeth, so to speak, on something hard, maybe you would get lost. Okay, so the Gemara is, and we're going to go to the halacha, but the Gemara, as quoted by Rashi, focused on our pasuk and our parsha, it seems to be taking the perspective that one should not learn Torah in depth on the road. However, it is important to look at this pasuk in Dvarim. V'hayu hadvarim ha'ela asher anochi mitzaveh. Oh goodness! I think I gave you the wrong pasuk. That's embarrassing. That is not the right pasuk. One second, and I will pull up the right one, probably right after or right before. I do find that sometimes these typos occur, and sometimes I do it too quickly by rote. Um, in the sixth parak of Devarim, it says Al Haderech. Let's find that. Yes, it is pasuk Zayin, the next pasuk. V'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam, right? Teach these things to your children. Say the following: B'shivtecha uvetecha uvelachtecha baderech uveshafchecha uvkumecha. Right? Recite them when you are at home, when you are away, on the road. Right? It's translated as when you are away, but it actually means when you are walking on the path, when you lie down, and when you get up. Okay, so we'll fix the source sheet later. My apologies. But it seems as though this pasuk in Devarim, which we recite all the time as part of Shema, is telling us that one should learn Torah on the road. And in fact, Pirkei Avot follows along this line, saying, "Hano'er balala v'hamalech baderech yichidi v'hamithaneh libo levatala harei zeh mitchayev benafsho." Rabbi Chananya ben Hakane says, one who wakes up at night or walks on the way alone and turns his heart to idle matters, which we understand to mean like schmoozes instead of learning Torah, behold, this man is mortally guilty. So, on the one hand, we have the story of Yosef, which is not halacha, right? And is not clear, where we're learning you shouldn't learn Torah on the road. And on the other hand, we have a pasuk from Devarim, which is much more transparent, and this quote from Pirkei Avot, which seems to say that you should dafka learn Torah on the road. Okay, I want to look a little bit at two sources from Rav Tabori's essay that I could not find in the original. Rav Kasher of the Torah Shalema, Jerusalem 1992, cites a manuscript of the Moshav Zakenim with a completely different understanding of Yosef's statement. Yosef meant that the brothers should not involve themselves in halachic issues to seek stringencies in halacha, chumrot. They should avail themselves of the halachic leniencies extended to travelers, such as eating demai, produce which has not known to have been tithed properly. So I find this Moshav Zakanim to just be so interesting, right? That to assume the brothers are worried about eating demai or not eating demai, but I think it's an interesting read on this idea, this sort of um, tradition that one shouldn't learn Torah. It's not that you shouldn't learn Torah, it's that you shouldn't streak stringencies in Torah. And I think that that very much applies today, right? If you find yourself stranded on the road, you didn't make it all the way to the next city with a kosher restaurant, certainly you should find something to eat that is kosher, preferably hechshered. But if you're going to eat or drink something that is not the hechsher you normally would have, right, at your own home, like that's okay because you're traveling and you got lost, you missed the exit, whatever it is, right? If you end up having to say mincha in your car because you're worried about being stuck in the dark on the road, right? There are many instances where we could imagine that have nothing to do with demai, where we might need to be makil on a road trip, and I think that's a beautiful interpretation that sort of feels a little more resonant, maybe, in my opinion. Another interpretation was given by the Midrash Devek Tov, which is that they should study Torah diligently and not treat it casually. And that I think is related to being on the road, is right, you can't learn something in quite as much depth. And so you should be careful not to treat it too casually, even when you're learning it sort of baal peh in the car or with a neighbor on the train or whatever it is.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
How do you explain that 400 years before the Torah was given at Sinai by people living in Egypt, Joseph was telling his brothers to study Torah?
I find it very difficult, right? It's an anachronism. How could they possibly? How could we have been worried about Abraham keeping kosher when he served the malachim meat and milk, right? Like to me, it's a preoccupation that I don't understand. However, I will say it is a very strong Masorah, this idea that somehow, like our holy ancestors were able to hold to the values expressed in halacha. But I agree with you, Nelson. I think it's a strange a strange assumption to make that the brothers were worried about eating demai, right? Like, what does that even mean? Before demai was a concept to be had, before there was any halacha written about it. And that's why I'm saying I think sort of the idea of like the concepts, right? Of like, do you wear the same clothes? Do you put your kippah on at a rest stop, right? Not necessarily any halachic thing, but like how do you represent yourself while traveling is maybe an interesting way of is the reason I brought this Moshav Zakani, even though sometimes I just skip the ones I can't find the original text to, because I think there's sort of a something that feels beyond halacha to me about it. It's almost like Yosef might be saying like be a kiddush Hashem on the way back, right? Like how we tell our kids on field trips, like everyone is watching you. Behave nicely. Find the leniencies that allow you to be a kiddush Hashem, as opposed to just saying, oh, well, if I can't find a kosher meal, I guess I'll just have a hamburger from McDonald's, right? Or French fries or whatever. I think this whole mitzvah of the week and several of them have hinged on that in some way or another, right? What did Sarah care about the mitzvah of lighting candles or Avraham the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim, right? It's like a strange concept.
Must be something symbolic or metaphorically, like only our the forefathers and their descendants I'm being familiar with.
Yeah,
Abraham was something that everybody else didn't.
yeah. Yeah, I think there's that desire. And I actually think we see it in other ways in our culture, like um, wishing that certain presidents were not racist, right? Like we want the people we revere to hold all the values we hold, even when that seems sort of impossible given the historic setting in which they find themselves. And I think that's hard for us, right? We want our values to be consistent with those that we respect from a long time ago, even when that is really unrealistic. But I think that's what it is. I agree with you. It's sort of metaphor. Yeah, Judith, please.
I hope you can hear me because
Jen.
I'm using the phone. Um, just going back to the original verse, which you opined, translated as "Don't be quarrelsome." It seems to me there are all kinds of ways that could be taken more literally. Mainly that they shouldn't become so involved with the past and what happened, particularly as they're on the road and will be reminded as they pass near the exit
Yeah.
of what happened, that they shouldn't be distracted with those thoughts because their job now is to make haste and get to Jacob as fast as possible with the news that
Hmm.
they have to convey.
You're
And
doing like a twist on this last Rashi, right? The last idea of Rashi was they shouldn't argue, and you're saying no, tirgazu, like they shouldn't be distracted. They shouldn't lose their way with the preoccupation of the
yeah,
reliving the backward
either
journey.
stopping to go back to the scene of the crime or rehearsing things in their mind so
Yeah.
that mentally they're distracted and they're not taking care to make haste on the road.
Yes, I agree with you. Meaning, I think it's interesting. And so let's look at the halacha because the halacha actually does not really touch upon learning while traveling. And I think it's because it's not really there, right? For whatever reason we want it to be there, it's not there. But the closest we arrive is in the Shulchan Aruch and Orach Chaim. It says, "Hayotze derech yitzpalel." Right? Yehi ratzon milfanecha Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avotenu shetolichenu l'shalom v'chulei. Right? We're talking about when you say Tfilat Haderech. Um, Tzarich la'omra b'lashon rabim v'im afshar ya'amod milelech kashe'amerna v'im haya rochev ein tzarich le'reid, right? That you should say it in plural language, um, right? That you lead us, shetolichenu, even if you're a singular person. And if possible, one should refrain from traveling while one says it, right? To pull over or to stop walking or whatever. And if one was riding, you don't need to dismount to get down. So this is, again, it's not about learning Torah, it's about davening, and the Shulchan Aruch goes on to question when you should say Shema and when you should do other things. This all hinges upon Mishnayot and Brachot about, right, if you're riding on your donkey and it's time for mincha and you can't get down and you're going in the wrong direction, should you turn yourself on your donkey? Should you just, my favorite, right, mit kavein libo, should you like just turn your heart towards Jerusalem? If you don't know which direction it is or you can't turn that way. But again, not about learning. But the Magen Avraham, commenting on the Shulchan Aruch, brings learning in. And he actually quotes our pasuk. I'm sorry, I think I might have cut it too early. But what he says is v'yasok b'Torah baderech. You can engage in learning Torah on the derech, aval lo ya'ayin, right? Just as we saw in the Gemara, right? You shouldn't learn intensively b'halacha. Dilma ate la'atrude. Oh, that's what it is. It's that you might come to make an error, right? It doesn't say tirguzu the same way, but similarly, that you shouldn't come to make an error. ואפשר ביושב בעגלה ואיש אחר מנהיג הסוס, share afilu iyun. Now, this is my very poor translation, and I make it sound as though the Magen Avraham is very certain. It seems that that's not a wide consensus. I'm not sure how to translate it to show doubt, but it seems to me what the Magen Avraham is introducing is the idea that you may not be the driver. Right? Driving and looking at a daf of Gemara is very different than riding in a train or riding in the back seat and looking at a daf of Gemara. And so it seems to me what he's saying is if you are a rider and someone else is, I didn't know how, manhig hasus, right, is guiding the horse, is driving the horse, whatever it is, then you could even allow learning intensively at that moment. Which seems to be, again, about this atrude or tirguzu, right? That if the reason you can't learn on the derech is because you might become to get lost or it might be dangerous, therefore, if you're not the one in charge of directing the ride, it doesn't really matter. You can do what you like. Okay, I brought this sort of halachic discourse of Rav Tabori here. It's a little bit confusing, but we've learned these sources for the most part, and so I think we're going to be able to do it together. So he brings a lot of sources, most of which I have brought for us. According to most opinions cited above, there is no halachic problem of learning while driving, right? Much ado about nothing is maybe how I would frame it. However, according to Rabbi Elazar, it seems that concentrated learning is forbidden while driving. It may cause you to lose concentration. You may lose your way or worse. Rabbeinu Gershom explains that even according to Rabbi Elazar, the reason that one should not learn intensively while traveling is that passers-by who would observe the brothers delving intensively into a halachic topic may think that they are arguing and battling each other. This would cause animosity between the brothers and the passerby. So I did not bring us this source inside. It was too complicated for me to find it for us. But it's a fascinating idea that the way we learn Torah looks too much like arguing. And so we don't want to, when you have an argument on the road, sometimes that draws more arguers over to you or people butt into your argument. And the brothers should just sort of quietly and unobtrusively go back. Again, as Judith said, right, make haste, not to get distracted. But I think that's interesting that when we learn a halachic topic in depth, it's not that we would get distracted, it's that we would get too loud, right? The kol Torah of the brothers' machloket would be too much for the passersby. Interesting idea, which right then has nothing to do with whether you're the driver or the passenger. You shouldn't be arguing about a daf of Gemara or the Parsha, even if you're a passenger. Divrei Shalom pointed out that according to Rashi, it would seem only the driver is forbidden to learn intensively where other passengers may learn. However, according to Rabbi Gershom, no one should learn. If one was driving alone without any passengers, according to Rabbi Gershom, even he could learn, because if you have no chavruta, then there's no fear of big machloket, right? Big explosive machloket. According to Rashi, that might even be worse because there's no one to caution the driver to be observant. So Rav Tabori is introducing this interesting machloket between being distracted on the road versus being too loud on the road, which has opposite ramifications on whether you can learn while driving or alone in the car. Okay, he told an interesting story. Oh, here, he tells this interesting story, which I gave us. It goes without saying that one should use common sense and be careful while driving. I check the Eruv often in Ann Arbor, and Rabbi Chaim Jachter of Teaneck, New Jersey, is our Rav Hamachshir, the head of the Eruv, and he comes once a year to do a check. He's an amazing Talmid Chacham. I love to walk the Eruv line with him for 2 days because I learned so much. And one of the things he said to me, he said, "You should not check the Eruv in the car." I was like, "Rav Jachter, it takes like a whole day to walk the Eruv with you. Like, no one can do that." And he said, it's very dangerous. You'll either get in an accident or you won't check the Eruv well, right? You can't have both. And so I sort of hear that here. It's like you can't drive well and learn well. And so you've got to choose one. If you're going to learn with a serious iyun, right? And he relates, Rav Tabori relates that he was once a passenger in a car driven by Rabbi Eliezer Simcha Wasserman. So according to Rashi, he cannot learn Torah. On the way, Rav Tabori asked Rabbi Wasserman a halachic question, and he replied that he has a tradition that is forbidden to discuss halacha while driving. So I think that it's unclear exactly what the answer is. I think the question is much more interesting. What bothered the rabbis to prompt them to understand this as learning Torah? What were they worried about learning Torah? I think travel was obviously enormously different in the time of the Gemara and even the time of the Magen Avraham. And so it's hard to say exactly. It seems to me that one can learn Torah while driving. And so just for fun, I put five really fun, sort of diverse podcasts here. But if anyone has other podcasts about Torah that they like to learn, I'd be happy to add them. My husband added Texting in Real Life, which is Alana Stein-Haynes' podcast. Pardes from Jerusalem, often referred to by Bobby and I. Talking Talmud is a wonderful mentor and friend and my children's pediatrician when we lived in Riverdale, Dr. Yardena Osband and her chavruta, doing Daf Yomi. Igros Moshe A to Z is the New York Rabbi Linzer, not the Chicago Rabbi Linzer. Rabbi Dov Linzer, who's the head of Yeshivat Chovevei Torah. It's a really interesting podcast where he learns a lot of Rav Moshe. So it's a halacha podcast. And the Sfarim chatter, also added by my wonderful husband, who listens to many more podcasts than I do, is about Sfarim, sort of widely, not just like Tanakh or books of halacha, but like even some modern books that he finds the author and he talks to them about the book. So I think that podcasts certainly fall into the you won't be overly distracted category in general. I think all of these are sort of light and fun. But I would hold off on heavy learning, whether because you might argue too loudly or you might get distracted, and both of those would be dangerous. And on that sort of light note, I will open the floor to conversation and questions.
So I listened to the Matan one-on-one podcast,
That's a good one.
but that takes real concentration. And so if I'm doing it while working in the kitchen or in the car, I miss a lot. And I really, when I'm driving, I have to focus because I don't all of a sudden want to see cars stopping ahead of me and I'm going full speed or miss a turn. And I very often find I have to listen a second time. Also, the Pardes Parsha podcast. It's very hard to really focus if you're doing something else at the same time.
I will agree with you that sometimes I find I have to go back. Like I'll catch myself drifting and I'll have to go back 30 seconds, to recatch whatever the last idea was. But that's interesting, right? You are experiencing what the rabbis were experiencing, which is that it can be very distracting to learn Torah and try to do something else at the same time.
Right.
The rabbis would never have dreamed of doing anything in the kitchen while they learned Torah, so I love that. But being on the road too was a dangerous thing back then. I think in a way that it's not quite as dangerous today. Okay, well,
Rabbanit, first of all, Yasher Kochayach. Second of all, what word does the Magen Avram use? True day?
yeah, la true day.
And how do you translate that?
Because he might come to make an error, which is the translation that Sefaria uses in the Gemara. The Gemara uses that word a true day, and so I just actually the Gemara does not use it, but I looked it up in Jastro, and that was how it was translated.
I was wondering if it could also mean the person is going to be preoccupied, like
Yes.
to be tarud in something, meaning the person is so busy with something.
So I almost translated it as I would say like delayed because he got distracted. But I think that they are sort of synonymous within the Gemara, both in Tirguzu and La'atrude. Become so distracted. Like, what's the nafkamina of being distracted? Is that you'll make an error. That seems to be the worry, ultimately. But it's a fair point. Thought you were going to tell us a story of a rabbi who did or didn't learn in the car, Rabbi Eliakim.
I was?
I thought you were going to tell us a story of a rabbi who did or did not learn Torah in the car.
Yeah, I've heard a million stories like that. I remember I was once, I think it was at an OU Yarchikawa or something like that, and a Rav from Muncie, Rav Radinsky, was speaking. He was speaking about a different subject. And he was speaking about some Rosh Yeshiva who he was later on turned off by, but in the meantime, that he very highly respected at that point. And he said, "Oh, this is great. Now I'm going to have a chance to ask him all the questions on halacha and so on and so forth." And he kept asking him, and he kept saying, "Just drive, just drive."
Interesting. There is a story, I can't remember which side. I'm seeing if I can sort of quickly pick it up. There was a story about here it is. Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, he was the head of YU, but he lived in Boston, founded the school that I went to as a child, Maimonides. Um, and he traveled often between New York um, and Boston in those two roles. And I just want to get the story right. Um, right, there is a question of how far one has to travel. Oh man, now I can't find it. How far one has to travel to say Tfilah Haderech, and it's noted that Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik would not recite Tfilah Haderech in these trips because he felt that it was so sort of routine for him that um, he would not say Tfilat Haderech, and that there's like a story sort of in the lore that one of his drivers started to say Tfilat Haderech sort of under his breath once they had left the parameters of the city, right? Often when people say Tfilat Haderech, and Rav Soloveitchik sort of pulled him over, like said, like pull over, and he said, "Why are you saying Tfilat Haderech? This is like a common trip for us. You don't have to. Don't worry." And the student who was driving him clearly felt nervous. Maybe he didn't drive him every time. He didn't feel like it was routine to him. Right. I think a lot of these things are really all about the perspective that one brings to them. If you take an airplane twice a week, you're much more likely to feel comfortable on an airplane than if you travel twice a year, right? And if you drive the same road every day and you feel very confident and comfortable in the car, that's different than driving. Right? I try not to listen to podcasts at night. It like makes me anxious. I feel like I really need to focus on the road in a different way than during the day. I didn't feel like that in my 20s. I do now, right? Like these things change for a person and between people. It's a very personal experience. And I think this idea of like being safe over, even with the pasuk from Devarim and even with the Mishnah from Pirkei Avot, we need to put our priority on safety, even though we don't want to be frivolous with our time. It's an interesting balance.
My husband's parents live in a different state, and when we go to visit them, we keep the little Tefillah Seder prayer in the car because one year we forgot it and we had to double back and look for it. David did not want to leave the state so whenever we leave the state, our state, Illinois, we cross over and we read Tefillah Seder. I read it and he keeps driving.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I love that you are the one that does it because, right, you don't need to stop the car because you're riding, as we saw in the
Right.
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 I think these things gain a sort of superstitious quality, right? I used to be anxious when I flew, and I would recite Tfilah Haderech as like a talisman, like now nothing bad will happen to me. And of course, if God forbid there's an airplane or a car accident, it's not going to be whether or not you said Tfilah Haderech, but it sometimes gives us comfort, and sometimes learning Torah gives us comfort, whether on the road or while stationary.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there
I'm sorry I'm late, by the way.
That's okay.
Computer difficulties.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was late.
I know there are people who listen to Daf Yomi while commuting. a number of years ago, we were staying in Beit El, which is a yeshuv north of Jerusalem. And we were in the car with somebody driving into Jerusalem for work, and he was listening to Daf Yomi. He said every day driving to work through the Jerusalem hills and around Ramallah, he's listening to Daf Yomi.
I used to catch up on Daf Yomi on my way to Chicago. I don't do it anymore, but I had done it. I had stayed on strong for a few years, and that was like a great time to catch up. Was those few hours I could get a few good daf in. And certainly it's not the same, right? It's not the same as sitting with your Gemara while you listen, but it was good enough for me to catch up.
What Dr. Nelson was asking before, about 400 years before Torah was given, but those are all the classic examples that we have of Avram did every mitzvah in the Torah. He did all 613. Kedushas Levi and Shemesh Shmo speak about it, that he understood intuitively what the mitzvahs are. He even did Erev Chatzeros that didn't come around until Shlomo HaMelech. Yaakov put on tefillin, but they weren't really tefillin. They were pieces of bark off a tree. But there was
I
the
mean, even
concept
2
of it.
weeks ago, right, that Yehuda did Yibum.
Right.
But I agree with you. I mean, I think what makes this question interesting is not whether or not you can learn Torah, but what like bothers, right? Isn't there that book, what's bothering Rashi? I think it's like a super interesting question here. What is bothering the rabbis? What would prompt them to want this to be about learning Torah when that is sort of a idea that is not obvious? What would prompt them to even be considering learning on the road? And there was a decent amount of travel. I think these stories about rabbis that travel from Bavel to Yerushalayim, right, that they appear in the Bavli and the Yerushalmi as a traveler, someone who is reporting something that happened in some other location, right? Like they understood the dangers of traveling, and they seem to want to find that in the text, right? It seems like they had to look pretty hard for it here. I don't know. Next week, we close out Sefer Breshit, and so we will begin to wade into deeper mitzvah water. But I look forward to Vayichi next week, and I hope everyone stays warm, and if you're traveling, you travel safely, and I will see you next week. An early Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much. Shabbat
Thank you very much.
Shalom.